And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show today. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And please do check out our new website. We have a bunch of new features, including our Jumpstart Your Intuition program, which is free for you to download from the website. And so you too can start using your intuition and your intuitive abilities in your life every day. So let me tell you a little bit about this hour's guest. We're going to be speaking to Gregory Sams about his new book, The State is Out of Date. But here's a little bit about him. Author and cultural change agent Gregory Sams opened the very first natural food shop and restaurant in London in the late 60s. He hung out with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Now, how cool is that? And created and then sold the now famous Veggie Burger. And now he is, coming out with breaking news about why isn't politics working. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Gregory Sams. Hey, Greg, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Dr. Rita. Good to be here.
Well, I am just so happy to have you on. I mean, I read your book, and, it just seems a little controversial, which, of course, makes me happy. But why did you decide to write this?
Tell you the truth, I first wrote this book. It was 15 years ago, but the world wasn't quite ready for it. It was really my recognition that the political process wasn't taking us anywhere. After a certain amount of years, you've been through 5, 6 or more changes of government in America or in England. I've seen revolutions in Iran, in different countries, and it always goes back to the same old, same old. And people got really excited about Tony Blair when he became prime minister over here. Say, breath of fresh air. This is going to be cool. People were really excited about Obama in America. But 15, 20 years ago, I realized that, no, they're not really getting anywhere. And I had quite a few inputs in my life as well that supported this. And when enough of these inputs came together, chaos theory was one of them, Lao Tzu was another, there was a remarkable teacher, Andrew J. Galambos, who taught me various things, and then going to alternative, quotes unquote, illegal festivals out in the country where, these all came together, and those festivals, I'd see a few thousand people come together and self-assemble a mini city or a mini town where they would live for a week, and there would be people catering, people looking after kids in a creche. There'd be music, there'd be workshops. It'd be a completely safe environment. 3-year-old kids would be wandering around without their parents looking over their shoulders to see if they were okay. And chaos theory was the science, came to light in the sort of 80s and 90s, which recognized that complex systems self-organize, whether that's water molecules organizing into a weather system, trees, frogs, rivers organizing into a rainforest, or human beings organizing into the shoe industry or the music industry. We do it really well. And I had enough inputs to realize this wasn't just my impressions. This is really the way things work. And we see everything that the state has become involved in seems not to work. We're always complaining about, health care or security and policing and education and whether or not we vaccinate our children. And every time they get involved, things get problematic. But nobody complains about, the darn music industry. They're always feeding music we don't like, or my shoes never fit, or when I buy a 6-pack of beer, there's only 5 bottles in there. All those things work, but it doesn't work with the states. So I thought, well, let's just look at this and see if there's something else, some other way of doing things that doesn't need to have, somebody running it from the top down. And that's the basis of the book.
See, now you have my curiosity going. Illegal festivals?
Oh yeah, well we're really good at that in this country.
I mean, I've never even heard that. I mean, what you were describing, sounds like going to a Grateful Dead concert. There's Dead City and there's everybody running around and people selling food and crafts and kids running all around and this feeling of sharing and caring that happens in this little makeshift city in the parking lot. And it sounds like that it's the same kind of energy, the same kind of vibe at these illegal festivals, even though I'm not quite sure why they're illegal. But
well, quite a few of them are now legal. They've been going long enough, and they want to get a good venue, and they want to make sure they're not shut down by the police. So they pay the whatever you need to pay to get licenses and permissions. But a lot of them were born in farmers' fields, places out in the country. You drive, late at night, and somebody be out in the middle of a road with a flashlight driving you down a country lane, and suddenly you arrive in this whole community. And it's like Grateful Dead concerts or like Burning Man. Not always based on music, but there's usually music there. And England's had a lot of that because it's a very old country, and there are certain traditions about land use that, common law things that still continue. So you can do this stuff. But that was kind of, and I used to go to Goa a lot. When I started going to Goa, I saw parties happening there, and it would just be somebody's idea, and different people would come in. The people selling the alcohol Indian people would, this is Asian Indians, of course, people selling the alcohol would provide the sound system, DJs would provide the music, these chai ladies, women would come with bundles on their head and lay out a little, dozens of them, their little encampment where you could go and have tea, coffee, cake, sandwiches. You'd leave all your bags and belongings with them. They'd be like your little cloakroom. You'd go back there for a cup of tea. And at the end of the day, you pay them what you'd had all the night, and then you take your goods, your jackets away. And it was really just seeing that self-organization happening in the flesh made me realize that all these other theories worked. We do self-organize, and here's the evidence it's happening. So that was, I needed all those pieces to put the book together. And then I needed to wait 15 years for the world to get in such a messy state that people said, yes, what's this about? We're tired of government.
And it seems like if people are left up to their own devices, they'll make things work, because they want harmony and they don't want to be in an environment of discord. Absolutely.
And we see a really good example of this on the internet, which is as yet people's territory. No government claims to own the internet, even though some of them are not controlling it and the NSA might be snooping in it. They're not actually designing the architecture of it. So you get lots of vendors. I mean, I don't know how Amazon fit within the corporations of the world or eBay, but they're pretty large, pretty international, and they don't have any jails. They don't have any police force. They don't have any fines, but they've got this big economy, and they figure out non-coercive ways of keeping bad people, buyers and sellers, out of the system without it costing all the rest of the customers loads of money to keep them in jail for years at tens of thousands of dollars a year because they stole a pair of shoes or something.
Well, that's because it has to come in the mail.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, that's how, when we're doing things, we don't resort to hitting people over the head with sticks every time, we want them to do stuff. It's not really that's the only tool the government has, is coercion, is do this or we'll damage you somehow. And that works when you're seeing off people trying to, break down come into your country and carry off your goods and, invade you. But when you're regulating how people live and what size package you put spaghetti in when you're selling it, and, just the normal day-to-day stuff of life, you don't need that, do this or we're going to damage you somehow regulation. And when you apply that, you get this top-heavy structure that often gets it rarely achieves the objectives that it's going for.
But it operates on a basis of fear versus on a basis of wanting to get people to participate in making the whole thing work.
Yeah, and that it destroys the actual basis of a community, which is everybody wanting to get together and, as you say, see what works. That's how we do it. And I guess at some point people said, well, it's so important that, everybody, toes the line and behaves properly. Let's make it law that, if you use the dreaded N-word when you're talking about somebody of color, you go to jail, you're fined, rather than you get shunned by society, because what kind of a jerk is this who's speaking like that? And that's really stuff that we do, and it shouldn't all be managed through fear, as you say.
Well, humiliation is a great tool. I don't think it's used nearly enough.
Yeah.
And it just makes you wonder, are there really that many, quote unquote, this is how I say it, bad people out there? I mean, I run a business. I take credit cards as part of my business. And in all of the years I have done credit card processing, I don't even think I've had 10 people try to rip me off in all of the years. And I hear stories from other people where it's like, oh my God, I always have all these problems. And it's like, really?
When I was very young, believe I was 14 or 15 years old, I used to run a coin business. And I lived in England. I used to send coins to America. I advertised in newspapers there. And people would order stuff. I'd just send them the coins. And they'd send me the money. And I like you, I never got ripped off once. And I really think, the vast majority of people, the vast majority of people are good people. And they don't steal and cheat and lie. But we have this system that we live in where very often the bad guys rise to the top. And they get away with all of that because there are loopholes in the law they can get around, and they can sue you if you say they screwed you. It's not again, but that's the whole fear-based system. And when you're operating in a fear-based system, people who understand fear, i.e. bad people, tend to manipulate it and do well out of it. And that's what we really want to avoid, because once those people get to the top, you've just got more of it. And of course, if you look at the people who run the American government and the English government, and I think most governments in the world, most of them are lawyers. Most of your congressmen and senators are lawyers. And lawyers don't think about harmony, cooperation. They think about conflict. You're either right or you're wrong. You're always fighting for something. You're never coming to a consensus on it. And then you get them like kids, shouting at each other, in the Congress and signing bills they haven't read because that's what their side does. And it's I'm not saying all lawyers are bad people, but they have a bad structure that they, some people might contradict me on that statement, by the way, but they have a bad headset they work with, which is conflict. And that's what we get. And we live in this conflict-obsessed society where half the entertainment is about people fighting over one thing or the other, whether they're criminals, soldiers, or lawyers.
But it seems like that act of fighting goes back thousands of years, and we have not gotten out of that structure.
Well, it does, but not that far. It goes back to 2600 BCE, and that's the first time that we have any evidence of that anywhere in the world. Now, modern human beings have been around for 100,000 years. We've had some sort of a culture for 30,000. Now, some people take this figure way further back with Atlantis and Lemuria, areas like that. But just looking at classical archaeology, I've been to the British Museum, and I noticed something the time before last when I was there, and I had to go again just to double check it. And that is that in the Mesopotamian rooms, they've got all these exhibits going back to 6,500 BCE, and none of them have any evidence of this top-down hierarchy, people with knives or swords or clubs or chariots or soldiers, any of that. And yet they had cities that did trade with each other. They mined metals in the mountains, worked them, had artisans. They had a civilization going. They didn't have writing, because the first written words we have are to do with taxation, how many goats Farmer Freedy took to market, that sort of thing. But we have the archaeological evidence of people living well. In South America, there was a 14 centuries of Tiwanaku civilization that spread into an empire from 500 of this era and to 1100. And their empire didn't conquer with swords or military. They conquered with culture. They had a really highly developed culture, civilization, and everybody said, yeah, we want some of that. And when they finally collapsed in 1100, it was because of prolonged decades of drought and that sort of dispersed that culture. Even in medieval cities in the sort of 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, we had in Europe hundreds of medieval cities that kicked out. They became strong enough, vital enough, they could kick out this bloody duke or prince who had, 100 troops or something, who used to come and, demand monies and allegiance from them. They chucked them out, and they built walls around their cities to protect them. And if Florence was such a flourishing city, they rebuilt their wall 2 or 3 times as the city expanded. But they were run by peasants' communes, peasants being anybody who wasn't titled. So peasants were also architects, they were bakers, they were dressmakers and farmers, and they ran this very efficiently. And Florence in 1342 had a population of 90,000. They had 8,000 boys and girls in school. They had 600 in higher education in 4 universities. They had 30 small hospitals with 1,000 beds between them. So they had this civilization and culture. It's not, we haven't always been run by the top down, by people telling us, do this or we'll damage you in some way. And that's, okay, people could say, oh, that was a long time ago. We're too many of us now to manage that. But they're not. We're more connected now than they were in Florence. They didn't even have telephones in 14th century Florence. We've got the internet, smartphones. We're all connected with each other, and that's how you create order and harmony in a complex system when all the parts are interacting, all those feedback loops are looping back and forth, response and action and reaction. And that's what creates the sort of harmony that we experience in the shoe industry or the music industry or countless other things in our lives that we're happy with, that we've got no complaints about.
But let me use your example. You were talking about Florence, but wasn't Florence held together based on religious sentiment? And how does religion play in? Because that is a social structure and a controlling agent in and of itself.
Well, religion has been controlling. You had the Vatican having their crusades and things going out. But no, it wasn't. There were, as the city got more and more prosperous, there were merchant families that got in more of a managing situation because they had a lot more money, but they still weren't, passing the type of laws that we have today, saying, or that they had in sort of Protestant Switzerland, where the church was a powerful force, and blasphemy, not going to church, things like that were heavily punishable offenses, where it was illegal for 100 years or so to sing or dance or make music. But that was when the church was running the state. But they didn't have a top-down state to be run in Florence or many of these other cities, and they all had their city charters by which they ran, which everybody signed up to, but they varied from every city had its own way of doing things. the way that suited it, and that worked. But eventually, kings, larger power bases, did bring all this under the coercive control eventually, for sure.
You know,
But those, yeah, go on.
I just feel like there should be a great sound effect that goes with that.
Yeah.
You know, but when we kind of come back to present times, it seems like, you know, and I'm talking about where we're at today. You know, we were talking about bad people and this need for control. You know, it seems like where we are economically, it's almost pushing people to do bad things. You know, to have their needs met, you know, to live.
It's well, where we are today, I'm not quite sure what you mean pushes people to do bad things. I mean, the crime hasn't necessarily.
So you have a family of 4 and you have been a law-abiding citizen your entire life, but now you're laid off, you know, and you're in this position where, you know, I mean, in the United States, for example, to get things like food stamps, you know, because you're in between a rock and a hard place, you know, they say things like, oh, well, you have 2 cars, and so you're not eligible. It's like, really? Right. Really?
Well, yeah.
You know, well, and so I think it just pushes those people to do what they have to do to live.
That's an unfortunate situation, and you're right there. But I'm looking at the roots of this rather than, you know, looking for more Band-Aids to stick on it. And I know taxation in America might be a little bit lower overall than in Europe, but in Europe, when you have you add in the tax on your income and Social Security, and then we have this value-added tax, which is 20%. You've got sales tax in America. There's all the taxes on alcohol and gasoline. We have tax on airplane tickets and insurance policies. Import taxes on goods, death duties. I don't know if they tax you when you die in America. When you add all this up over here, it's like 60% or so of all the money that we're generating, and the actual money we create, not the money that's printed and debt created. You know, when we turn a bit of clay into a china cup, or when we grow food out of the ground, we're creating wealth. 60% of all that goes through the state's mechanisms. And some of it gets sprinkled back in food stamps. A lot of it goes in wars and administration. But if that money was with us in the first place, for every $100 you had in your pocket, you would now have $250. And that would be real money in the system. And I don't think it's that idealistic to suggest that there would be a lot less poverty, homelessness, and unemployment if this money wasn't being sucked out of the system. And we do have situations, and we're seeing them happening now, where governments collapse. The entire Soviet Union, USSR, collapsed. The Egyptians overthrew their government. The Ukrainians have just overthrown their government. But what we are continually replacing with it is just another government, another state, different packaging, different programs perhaps, but the same basic beast. And these situations will continue to arise. And I'm really looking for the day where somewhere, someplace, people don't just install saying, oh, well, who's going to lead us now? We need a new shepherd and different breed of sheepdog to keep us all in line. And I'm trying to open people up to the idea, well, actually, we can do this ourselves. We are good people, and let's design a system where good people do well and bad people get shunted out of the system without us having to pay tens of thousands of dollars a year to lock them up in a prison and feed them and house them. You know, you exile them in whatever the modern way of exiling somebody from the system is, whether you sort of shunt them off from Facebook and credit cards and things that they regard as essential parts of living a happy life, then that's a cheaper way of doing it than locking them up.
You know, I'm like, ooh, some economic sanctions.
Well, there are things that people feel are really as irreplaceable as their freedom, but that are a lot cheaper in a joined up system to say, okay, these people are trying to screw the system, they're messing it up for everybody. Let's get them out of the system. I'm not saying they're going to starve or die of hunger or something, but in medieval times and in tribal societies, that was the ultimate penalty. They used to have set penalties if you'd killed somebody or if you'd stolen something, or if you'd done something bad. Even if it was to another tribe and not your own tribe, they had ways of meeting together, seeing what the situation was and saying, okay, this, you've done bad, George. You might be my brother or my neighbor, but you've screwed up here, and you've got to provide restitution to the other side and, balance this situation so everybody's happy. And that's how they would resolve it. And then if George refused to do that, said, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to hold by this, then that person gets moved out of the community. And that's a horrible penalty. You're not punishing them. You're just saying, okay, you're not in our society anymore. And that was a very effective way of keeping crime levels to an absolute minimum. Whereas today, if you look at the actual structures we have all over the world, the more criminals and the more crime we have, the better the police, judiciary, and penal system do. They all profit from crime as much as the criminals, and that's not a good basic structure to have.
Well, yeah, and from what I understand, in some of the communities that you're talking about, they would even go as far as, marking the individual. They talk about like the mark of Lot, or not Lot, of Cain.
Okay.
Whatever. Which identified that individual as having been shunned, and so that other people, the people in the community or the people in the neighboring communities would also recognize, that person, they were a bad person. Don't talk to them.
But the point is, this was effective, and again, where they weren't keeping records then of how much crime there was, but it would appear that there was a lot less than there is today. And of course, today, partly I suggest because of the fact that the whole security industry does well out of crime, we've had this enormous growth of things on the statute books that are criminal, what I call victimless crimes. And probably more than half of the people locked up in the U.S. and then the United States are there for victimless crimes. And that's really, whether that's not letting your kids be vaccinated or smoking marijuana or being late with your tax returns or not filling in official documents. There are just so many things that you can go to jail for that are really crazy. But of course, when you see the private prison industry in America, they have lobbyists. They go to Washington, D.C., and they lobby for more crimes to carry custodial sentences. And they get big arguments on why, people should go to jail if they commit this. And they bend the ears of the congressman and they pass laws to do that. And that's as long as you have a government, people will be lobbying it. You have the pharmaceutical companies going in there. There's with 3 lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industry for every single senator or congressman in the Capitol. And they are telling them, yes, it is in the public interests that this drug be administered to children or to everybody over whatever age. And they are, in a sense, running or directing in quite a large way the medical industry. You get food industry people want to get dubious additives and sweeteners added to the food. And again, they move their people into positions of influence in the FDA and approve the products that they created in their previous job working for that corporation. But somebody's always going to be running the state. somebody's always going to be influencing that body, and it's not going to be you and me. Occasionally, when there are enough tens of thousands of you and me's, and we take to the streets and we protest and we really, really bust our guts, they will pull back and say, oh, okay, we're not going to put a nuclear depository here, or we're not going to evict. I mean, my heart soared this morning. I just read about a tribe in Brazil. The state has gone in, and they've evicted the illegal miners and loggers who'd taken over this ancient indigenous population's land. I was so happy for them, because for every one of those, there's half a dozen where the state sends in the troops to kick them out on behest of the corporations. They sold the mining rights on their land too. So, but in this case, people had protested en masse, really heavily, and they had an influence. But it's really hard to do that, and we really shouldn't always having to be fighting these big crusades and battles to stop insane things from being sanctioned by the state.
But I think we get into a big dichotomy, because there's what people want, and then there's, what corporations want, which is to make money. And I feel like if corporations came from a more, I'm going to say, heart-centered place, then maybe they would create different kinds of products and, address things in a different way. Recently, there's this cereal, Crave. I just watched and go, I just can't believe that they make this stuff. But it's a breakfast cereal, and it's like a s'more. So it's got like a crunchy outside, like a graham cracker outside, and it's got chocolate and marshmallow inside. And I'm like, are you supposed to, one, feed that to your children? And two, why would anybody want to eat that much sugar for breakfast? But they make it, and they promote it, and they want you to buy it, versus thinking with a normal mind, would I want to eat this? You ask those CEOs, they probably would say no. Well, if they're saying no, that they wouldn't eat it, then they shouldn't make it.
They shouldn't, but they will make stuff that people will buy. And, Coca-Cola make a drink that many of us, including myself, feel is not conducive to good health. I think the last Coke I had was, somebody offered me a rum and Coke back in 1993 at a bar in Goa. And I said, yeah, I'll try it. I enjoyed it, but that's the last. I haven't had one since, and it was years since I had one before. And I know last time I was in America, I noticed that Coca-Cola was now selling water in vending machines, as well as other soft drinks. And they can't stop you from drinking water or fruit juice if you want to. Whoever's making this breakfast cereal cannot stop you from going out buying oatmeal and having oatmeal for breakfast, which is, a tenth the cost, even if it's organic. And at some point, we have to be responsible for ourselves, and corporations will respond to that. There's a lot of corporations in England are now selling organic foods that you can buy in the supermarkets, and they're verified as organic by the Soil Association. And that's because at the end of the day, they have to produce cars and foods and communications devices, things that we're happy with. And I'm sorry that, I've been in food, as you mentioned in the introduction, all my life. And it really saddens me to see what people put in their mouth, what advertising they respond to. But my God, there's been so much information out there about the damage that sugar does. Same with the damage cigarettes do. Now, tobacco does. People still choose to smoke. Of course, that is addictive. And if people want to smoke and drink and do this stuff, they're trading off a healthy old age against pleasure at this point in their life, if they regard those cereals as pleasure. And we do at some point have to take responsibility for ourselves and not think, oh yeah, if this was bad for me, the government wouldn't let them be selling it. That's our choices. And we are free human beings, and we have to make those choices.
And I agree. I mean, it becomes a really slippery slope. Where do you draw the line? But, and I'm just use food as an example, but there's, it seems like there's just a conflict because there are, things that they come out with, like they came out, I mean, this is kind of old with that Gardasil thing to prevent cervical cancer. And they came out with a law in Texas that said that 12-year-old girls had to receive the vaccine. And yeah. And people had a hissy fit, and then they had a few deaths associated with it, and so they repealed it. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like, do the politicians require their children to go get this vaccine too, or do they become exempt from the law, because they have the money and the social power, and standing to not have to comply, so they're listening to their own heart. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at, like, well, if I don't want to do it, not that I should pass judgment, but maybe I can make better decisions in the general sense.
Well, that's a, yeah, that's your do the politicians take it as a detail for me, because I'd rather they weren't there telling us we have to take it in the first place. But at the moment, sugar is coming back under fire in the UK. Yeah, there's quite a bit of awareness of how damaging sugar is in our diet. And that's something that I've been aware of since, the late 60s. We published a magazine from 72 to 78, Seed, the Journal of Organic Living, and we had several stories on what a killer sugar was in our diet. So now it's finally coming up into the public eye, and the government is saying, oh, we better tax sugar, make it more expensive for people. And I throw my hands up in the air and say, no. People should realize this is killing them. That's why you want to stop eating sugar, because it's creating all sorts of health implications for you downstream, and you don't want to spend your last years with pipes sticking in and out of you, addicted to various pharmaceutical drugs. And just taxing it stops people from recognizing that that's the problem. I've got another particular, sorry, it's a bit of a sidetrack, but one of my pet peeves is these damn smoking kills you and all this stuff they print on cigarette packets. They do that in America too, don't they?
Yes, they do.
And I don't smoke. Thank God I kicked it 10 years ago. Evil habit. But we all know about the power of positive suggestion. And the power of negative suggestion is the same. And, if you're looking at this thing saying, this is going to kill you, this is going to kill you, heaven knows how many extra tens of thousands of people die each year because that message is being imprinted on their heads 10 or 20 times a day. And that's, I find that really appalling that they put that on cigarette packs. When they started putting that legislation out here, I was going to go into business. I had a whole little stickers people could put on their cigarette packets. I wasn't a smoker, but saying smoking thrills and light up and enjoy. These things they could stick over those deadly messages.
Well, it just makes me wonder, because in the United States, they're talking about putting a new labeling requirement, or they passed a law to put a new labeling requirement, breaking down the kinds of sugars that are in different food products. Mm-hmm. But it's like, okay, so you're tapping on the sugar thing, but, to me, what about the GMOs?
Yeah.
Because that's like this mystery. You don't really know if you're eating them or not.
I know I'm really so happy that we still have, we got the requirement to label GMOs in Europe.
And see, we don't.
They're legal, but they have to be labeled. And I can tell you, I have never seen a single product on the shelves which says genetically modified ingredients on it. They can feed GMO to animals, and they don't have to mention it when they're selling the meat or the butter or the milk. Of course, organic you can't have it in organic. And if it's unlabeled foods or something that doesn't need ingredients like beer or wine, they could have GMO in that. But basically, nobody sells openly GMO foods because Nobody wants them. And that's why the industry is so fighting labeling in America, because if it's labeled, they're worried people are not going to want it, which is quite correct work, well-based worry.
That's because they wouldn't.
That's right. And I hope you get to turn the situation around in America. And I really hope that GMO dies a death in the next 10 years, because it's a iniquitous thing. And it hasn't really benefited anybody anywhere with crop yields or less pesticides or any of the supposed benefits that we're supposed to get from it.
Well, I mean, my big thing is we don't know what they're actually doing and what impact eating those foods are going to have. It's like we're one giant science experiment.
Yeah. And I don't know if they publish the results in America, these sort of international health tables, but America is one of the most diseased countries in the world, with the highest healthcare spending per capita, way above anybody else. And then they constantly bring this argument out, well, GMO foods must be safe. Everybody in America has been eating them for the last 20 years. There can't be anything wrong with them. And then you look at it and you've got a terrible obesity crisis over there, very high heart disease, cancer, and lots of people on medications from, I was told if you're over 40 and not on medications in America, it's unusual.
Pretty much. I mean, I had a guest on the show who is 80 and takes no medication.
Yeah,
and, has gone to the doctor and they're like, well, you didn't fill out your list of prescription medication. He's like, well, I don't take any. And they just look at him like he's crazy.
What's wrong with you? You're not on medication.
You're 80. You're supposed to be taking, 4 bags worth every day.
More people like you and the whole industry might collapse.
So if somebody outside, like a group of aliens, were looking at how our society was structured, what do you think they would think?
I think, first of all, the way they're structured, I think they'd be horrified. I think they would love, I'm sure we've got lots of things they don't have, whether it's on the culinary or the technology side of stuff. But we do. I've got a chapter in my book, What Would an Alien Think? And mention my book. It's called The State is Out of Date. We Can Do It Better. And it's in that chapter, What Would an Alien Think? I think they'd be horrified. And I'm pretty sure they would keep undercover, because if some alien with 2 heads or 3 arms or something wanders into a government office, say, hey, I'm from planet such and such, I bring peace and greetings. He'd be in Area 51 within 24 hours being studied and analyzed and possibly dissected. And they would be horrified at the variety of ways that we have of killing each other and all the conflict and the weapons of mass destruction. And when we make science fiction movies, we're always talking about space commanders and squadrons from galaxies, yunks, and these high-tech weapons. And that's this assumption that a really highly developed civilization is going to be marked by having highly developed ways of killing masses, weapons of mass destruction, as we call them. And weapons of mass destruction is not, in my books, the sign of a highly developed civilization. It's a sign of a civilization that is never going to advance to the state and live long enough, survive long enough to really conquer interstellar travel and that sort of technology. And I think aliens would be horrified at the thought of human beings colonizing outer space and taking our coercive structural headset with them.
Good point. Very good point. It just makes me, kind of taking it from that perspective, that they would just look at us and go, what are they thinking? Why? Because there's a lot of stuff that we do that just doesn't make any sense. You talked earlier about chaos theory, but it seems like it's beyond chaos. It's just plain crazy.
It's plain crazy. Well, chaos theory, it's also have other names, which is complexity theory and anti-chaos theory even. because that shows that, they said earlier, a complex system. A complex system is a system with an uncountable number of parts, each one of them acting independently and unpredictably. And when you've got that, you do get this mysterious creation of order and harmony. And that's, what we find. I mean, so all the things we really love and trust and work in our society came out of that. You had two bicycle mechanics. The Wright brothers created an airplane in 1904, I think. And out of that, just by accident, we stumbled into the international airline industry. It arose out of that, and we did that. That's chaos theory at work, and it's wonderful. But once the government intervenes, then you break all those feedback loops. I mean, farmers used to produce the food that people wanted to eat. Now that seems kind of logical, good sense to most people. But the government got involved and said, oh no, people should be eating this. They should be eating more. You should have a chicken in every pot every day. And this is how we want to manipulate the food system for the benefit of the people. And of course, the corporations have a hand in deciding what's for the benefit of the people there. And they break that feedback loop of farmers grow what people want to eat. That's a really simple feedback loop. And when you cut that, you end up with things like genetically modified foods. But you also end up with corn. 40% of America's corn crop goes into automobiles instead of people's bellies. And there's this huge subsidy support system where just about every farmer of any size in America loses money unless he gets his subsidies.
Yeah, and that makes
so they're
absolutely
hooked on
no
the state
sense
support.
to me.
And that's what happens when you break food feedback loops. And every time the state gets involved, even if it's for the best will in the world, and you say, yeah, we really need to do this, let's pass some legislation to get there, feedback loops are cut, and you don't know where you're going to end up because you've got one crazy mechanical butterfly with metal wings flapping about in the system and just chopping things to pieces.
And I don't know if this is related, but I would like to hear your take. And just to let you know, we have 5 or 6 minutes left.
Okay.
5 or 6 minutes left. I was having a conversation actually last night about where we are in society. And it seems like in the last, 10 or 20 years that there really hasn't been anything new. And let's not talk about like electronic stuff, but you look at the music industry, you look at the movie industry, they are remaking songs, they are remaking movies 3 and 4 times. And it seems like the creativity level that people have, more in the artistic area, seems, limited. And do you think that some of this regulation and this control that people are experiencing is impacting their ability to create new things?
Yeah, I do, because creativity and innovation happens on a small scale. You don't get big companies being very innovative, and they're quite honest about that, which is why they buy small companies. But it's really hard to start up as a small company and work through the maze of legislation and regulation on who you employ and how you employ them and what your product looks like and how you sell it and get approval for your wine labels before you can put a new variety of wine on the market. And there's all this sort of network of fog that you've got to try and fight through, and that stymies that innovation that can make, where people can make films out of their back pocket. And I mean, you get a certain amount of that. You do get people making films cheaply now in some instances, but overall, it moves things towards corporations rather than small, innovative people. And that's a real missing element of change from our society.
So is there anything that we can do to change what's going on, change the dynamic, maybe get our voices heard? Anything, throw us a bone here.
I think the most important thing is to stop expecting that the state is going to get it right. Stop pressing them to solve this problem and that problem, because the only way they solve problems is by taking more of our money to achieve the task, and then passing laws to create what it is we think we want. And they've got a terrible track record on this. Now and again, you can fish something out of the basket that has been a positive, effective legislation, but it's really hard. And so that's the first step. And once we kind of let go of the madness of expecting them to sort it out, I got a great quote from George Orwell on that somewhere, but I'm not sure if I can find it. It's like politics is a disease that mankind suffers from, and until we diagnose it, we never have no chance of curing it. And that's what we really have to do, is not think that it's going to ever get right, and take responsibility ourselves for solving our problems. Because as we continue, the state's going to be less and less able even to print those food stamps. And we really got to get used to the idea that we're a little bit on our own here, and to build structures and ways to operate that don't require government legislation, more and more of it, and not to waste that energy, and to try and get them to change. Obviously, we have to stop them doing some things. I don't know how we stop them building more nuclear power plants, because however many people get out on the streets, they're bringing fracking to the UK now. However many people go out and protest the fracking, the state sends in their police and soldiers to cart the people off. It'd be really hard for some of this stuff to happen if the police didn't cart us away. But still, we go out and do it. Yeah, so bones to throw out. Let
me ask a different. We'll come back to your book, but one just very quick little question. Because it seems like there is a growing movement of people trying to get off the grid. The whole prepper thing, and being self-sufficient. Do you think something like that is a good thing? Do you think that's something that people should maybe look at?
No, that's fantastic, because those people have completely stopped expecting the government to supply them even with water and electricity and basic things like that, because all that might fail. So that's really good, because that's at least whatever else falls apart, those people will still be there, and they'll be able to teach other people how to do that stuff. And it's being able to live off grid, I think, is a huge advantage, because they will have skills that we need. Because I don't know some of those skills. I don't know how to build a bicycle from scratch, or how to deal with things that you would need to do in that situation. But it's good that there are people who do and who can carry that knowledge forward.
Cool. And so your book, where can people get it? Whatever you want to talk about. We got to go to.
The book, it's a positive book. I mean, it's as much telling us how wonderful we are and how well we do get along with things, as sort of saying that the state isn't doing a good job. It's coming out in April, the first week of April, as a print book. The state is out of date. We can do it better. If you Google my name, Gregory Sams, all of that stuff comes up. And it's already out as an ebook. The ebook came out late. It was scheduled for September. It didn't come out to October 1st, which coincidentally was the day that Uncle Sam shut down because of that big budget crisis in Congress. So, and that's out. That's just a little over $1 to buy a copy of the ebook, which works really well. So I recommend getting that. And check out my website, because it's got a whole bunch of information on Veggie Burger, on my other book, which is about the sun, source of the light of life, fractal galleries, all sorts of interesting stuff.
Cool. Gregory, I had a great time. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing yourself with the listeners.
Okay, it's been a pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. That's Gregory Sams. His book is The State is Out of Date. His website is gregorysams.com. And next week, we're going to be speaking with Ted Peters about, are UFO pictures actually God's chariots. And so until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.jmenergy.com